remember hearing somebody once say that art was like the parsley on your plate. That you get this beautiful plate in front of you, and it doesn't look quite right unless you have this this piece of parsley that's beautiful and kind of decorating your plate on the side. I'm so disappointed in that because it's not the parsley, because you can take the parsley off and your plate's still delicious. Art is actually the salt.
Hey, my name is Ben Charland, and you're listening to your weekly, definitely not small talk podcast, What on Earth is Going On? And that voice that you just heard was Dawn Vandeshoot, my guest this week, who is a writer and performing artist in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and she's also a consultant and project manager for public art in that city, and that's the subject that we're going to tackle today. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to, as I always do, ask for your help. Please, if you like this show, spread the word. Go to the website, wogoshow.com. That's WOEGO show.com. You can find links there to social media, and you can also reach out to me directly. wogoshow@gmail.com is my email for any suggestions about future episodes, whether it's a guest or a topic that you'd like to see discussed. It's really important to me, and I'd really appreciate it if you could spread the word about this show. Give it a rating on iTunes or on Facebook or whatever podcast app that you use, and tell your friends about it, about your favorite episode. And of course, I'd like to hear what your favorite episode or what episode you haven't heard yet that you'd really like to hear. I've been looking forward to having this conversation for quite a while now. Dawn Vandeshoot is one of my oldest and closest friends, and her and I have had many, many conversations about art, the meaning of art, the purpose of art, why we do it, how it connects to the community, but we've never really boiled that down into public art and community art, a medium that she's been working in for quite a few years now. In our conversation, we tackle quite a few things, whether it's the controversy that can often surround public art in cities like Calgary, or the connection between art and democracy, or at least artistic expression and our democracy, a system or set of beliefs that is currently, as many see it, under threat. What role can art or should art play in all of this? I don't know exactly, and Dawn and I talk about this, but we don't come to any kind of solution or conclusion about it. I think actually that this is a problem that we as our greater society and in our communities need to come up with, need to build, need to have a dialogue about, so that there are certain, at least, rules of play or a certain understanding of what art and public art can be and should be in our world around us. Because it's something that's not just going to go away. If we don't fund it, it's not going to mean that our societies are going to become completely gray and boring and inhuman. Art is an integral part of our daily lives, whether we like it or not, whether it's our taste or not. And of course, the critical question for many, whether or not it should be funded by the government. It's a really, really important conversation, even if it's below the surface of the greater geopolitics or the world in flux around us. But I'm going to leave you with the conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I did. All right, so I'm here with Dawn Vandeshoot here in Toronto. Dawn is a consultant for public art and engagement in Calgary. Dawn, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much for coming. So I want to talk a lot today about public art itself, what the value and the meaning of public art is in our societies and in our cities, and of course about the controversy of public art, especially in a city like Calgary, which has come to a head in the last few months, where the population of Calgary feels, or many people feel, that public art is costing way too much money. I don't understand this stuff, and why are we spending taxpayer money? And of course, City Council has had to react to that. So it's been an interesting dilemma in that city that I think happens in other cities and in other contexts across North America, probably the world over. Really, it's the meaning and the value of art in our world, in our society. But obviously, before we get there, my first question, as always, is to you, Dawn, what on earth is going on?
I don't know, Ben. I think you know better than I do.
I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question.
I know. I believe that we're in an age where people have a lot of access to information. That information may or may not be factual, but it makes people believe that they know a lot, and it makes people believe that they're experts on everything, and also believe that they need to be experts on everything. And so people who are specialized or experts in a field who've trained and have that knowledge and understanding are often being devalued and or questioned in new ways. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. And in particular practices or expertise that maybe already didn't have a certain level of respect or admiration or in society, and if those are topics, they're often things that are more in the right brain side or things that are more classically feminine or perhaps less understood, and they're just not respected as expertise in general. So those are getting questioned more and more and more.
Right.
And everybody thinks they're an expert.
Do you think, though, that alongside of this, reduction of the sense that other people are experts and an increase in the sense that I'm an expert because I'm a human being and I surf the internet every day, do you think that concomitant with that is progress also in what you're just talking about, that there's a sense that everybody can have a voice in this, that even over 30 years ago, that a woman or a person of an ethnic minority in the workplace can have a voice that is equal to anybody else's, and it's more about what you say rather than where you come from. Do you think that there's been progress in that?
I don't, actually. I really think that the voices that are still most prominent and the ones that are most active are still the ones that have the most privilege.
Right.
So that privilege can be in a lot of ways. The people who have the most access to information and the most access to digital media to share that information are still the most privileged.
Right.
And then the voices that are going to be the most respected are the ones that people respect. And unfortunately, that hasn't changed a lot.
And I guess because of that, the contours of our human story today follow along the same path as they always have fallen. It's just that the medium has changed. The content is the same, but the medium has changed.
The ruts are just getting deeper.
Do you think things are accelerating?
That's possible. I mean, with the rate of technology and digital shift and people can't keep up.
Yeah.
And so, again, the people that have the ability and the privilege to control that are the ones who are going to move it along the quickest.
So when it comes to the work that you do with public art, how does this conversation come into play? Not just about people's voices being heard and privilege obviously having a place, but also the sense of expertise and the sense of I pay taxes, for example. I must know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, you shouldn't spend my tax dollars unless I decide that you can spend them there. This conversation about this accelerating churn of events and the way that we receive and interpret our information, how does this come to play in that world of public art?
Public art, because it's public, not everybody will ever love everything. It's impossible. I don't particularly like Taylor Swift, but a lot of people really, really do.
Yeah.
I don't particularly like the color orange, and yet I don't want to take it out of the rainbow. But these are things that we learn to kind of accept that people's taste buds are different, and we all think and feel things differently as we go through life, and that pop culture is popular because it's simple and easy and digestible and comfortable, and so we see this grand emergence of pop culture everywhere. But this idea that everybody can like something all together and that we're all going to appreciate it and want to put our dollars toward it, it's an impossible task. The question is whether or not it's valuable or worth it or good to enough people. And even if you don't like it or don't understand it, is that your place to say? So I'm not an engineer. I don't really understand, road construction and why we choose roads and where they go. But over 90% of a municipal budget goes to road construction.
Right.
I don't believe that I should have a say in that. I might be able to provide my opinion or have an opportunity or a forum to suggest where I think things should go or how they might make my life better in some way. But in no way do I believe that I should control the outcome of every single aspect of every road that happens in my city.
Do you think that it's about not having an opinion on that, or that your opinion should be weighted differently?
Yes. Yeah,
Right.
and it's not, I don't have the expertise. I don't have the whole picture
Right.
I don't understand, and I can't possibly understand the intricacies of all aspects of what goes into that one person's role or that entire team of people's role.
Right.
And I trust and believe that they know what they're doing and they are making informed decisions.
Right.
I also think one of the issues with, digital world and the world that we live in, where we're kind of separated from things, where we get to learn about things and we get to see like these little snippets of information that make us believe we know something, is we then depersonalize the people who maybe came up with that information. And so we get that a lot, when you work with municipal government, which I did for many years. The city did this. The city set this meeting and we couldn't make it, and they did this on purpose, and the city did that. Who's the city? The city is made up of 16,000 individuals who work there, and they do their job every day, and they work hard to make these tasks. So depersonalizing it and making it into this massive corporation that's somehow controlling your life by making bad decisions for you is one of the symptoms of this fast progressing idea that everybody somehow knows better than that.
How do we interpret if we are to break things down into their constituent parts and obviously the city has told you that you can't park here from 9 to 5, for example.
Yeah.
But if we say the Department of Roads or, Jim Dodgerson in the Department of Roads has decided that you cannot park here from 9 to 5. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but there are problems implicit in breaking down these meanings, and therefore there are solutions at play when we say the city does this. It also protects people who work for the city for not taking personal liability for making a particular decision. So when we're talking about these large conglomerates, they certainly can be oppressive. But to what extent is this helpful in our understanding of government, of society, to group things together, or is it more problematic than it's worth?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I don't like the depersonalization of this idea of an institution as a whole.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with wonderful individuals who've been working very hard to make society better every day. And yet at the same time, you're right, like when we installed Traveling Light, the Blue Ring in Calgary, the individual leaders in the public art department got death threats because of the installation of a public artwork, and because they could find an individual and they were no longer protected. They were kind of, left out in the open.
Right. Death threats, like people actually took the time to write and say, I will kill you because you put a piece of art up that I don't like.
Absolutely. And who does that about a road?
Right. And about a blue ring on that road. That's bizarre. Before we continue on this conversation, I want to take a step back and ask you, what is public art? Like, what are we talking about here? Public art is not just what we see in a museum. It's something that we interact with every day when we're driving on these roads that we can't necessarily park on, that built by the city. So what are we talking about when we talk about public art?
Sure. Public art, very loosely, is art in the public realm. Generally speaking, public art can be produced by anybody, but frequently it is produced by government, and often best practice is to have a % for art policy in order to produce public art, so that the public art is actually publicly funded.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be. It can be privately funded. It can be done by communities. It can be done lots of ways. But particularly in North America, the % for art funding model has been most accepted. And that's because it's a sustainable funding model. So the idea of a % for art model is that a percentage of any capital infrastructure that's being built, so only new buildings or new infrastructure, 1%, or some cities it's 2, some it's 0.5, it depends on the city, of the budget for that infrastructure gets dedicated to public art. So in that way, only if a city is thriving and growing and developing and building capital infrastructure are they also supporting public art. If they don't have the budget to grow and thrive, then public art isn't happening.
Right.
No operational budget goes into public art funding. So if there's just, the standard operating budget of a city goes into public art, that doesn't happen. It's almost always capital funded.
Right.
So
no, I was just going to ask you, what is the purpose of the art? Like, why have we decided as cities, as communities, to do this?
It's an economic driver. generally. Public art, like any cultural institution, it draws people, it creates a sense of place, creates a sense of identity, and it creates landmarks that people know and recognize, creates Instagrammable moments, it creates things that you can use for publicity, and so all those identifiers that create as a city, right?
Right.
And so, Chicago and Millennium Park and their beautiful public art that they have there, I mean, it is a driver for tourism. People come from all over the world to see it.
Right, like the Guggenheim in Bilbao, right?
Yep.
This is a town in northern Spain that had really no identity on the tourism stage. No one would be going to Bilbao for really any reason, and then they built this magnificent and landmark physical place. And you can look it up, what this place looks like. And now it is one of the premier destinations, probably not just in Spain, but in Europe. It has put Bilbao on the map, and it has become this nexus of tourism as a result of one single art institution. Not just the art inside, but of course people just want to get a picture of the museum.
Sure.
So obviously it has a very strong economic focus, as you just said, but as an artist, surely you would agree that there's another side of it too, that art has a function for community, not just creating business and opportunity and driving people there, but does it create a sense of community within itself? What focus or what purpose does art serve in that sense, or if any?
Absolutely. I mean, art can create a sense of community identity just by being there. It's amazing how people will adopt pieces and start to frame their lives around, I'm going to meet you there. Let's meet at the Bears. Let's go to that statue. I mean, they become a part of the scape of a city and the identity of that. But then you see a lot of public art that becomes interactive, or the ways that people live with it becomes something that they seek. We have a piece there's a piece in Calgary that has been the focal point of a lot of music videos. It has light in it, so they'll use it as the backdrop in music videos, and it gets this life beyond itself.
That's in the Beltline, right?
Yeah, that's Chinook Arc. So there's a lot of ways that a piece, even just by existing, can kind of create community. My particular practice is community cultural development. That's actually what I'm most interested in, where you actually create a work of art that specifically addresses an issue or need within a community in order to strengthen that community within itself through the making of the art. So that's my practice.
What's an example of that?
It's done a lot through community arts. So you might do it through, celebratory workshops. The most common example that's very, often seen as pedestrian is that idea of handprints on tiles, where, you'll go into school and everybody will put their handprint on tile and you'll put it all together and you'll make a big cultural mosaic and that'll go up on the wall.
20 years ago, I can say that was my handprint. This is my community.
Yeah. Right. And so that's a very simplistic and often looked down upon way of doing it. But there are ways to do that within the public realm that are certainly more dynamic. And so to the point where, community arts and community cultural development have been happening for decades. In the last decade particularly has been the rise of what's called social practice in contemporary art realm, which is very much the use of the public as the medium for your art practice. And so there are some who say social practice is the gentrification of community arts, and in either way. But no matter how you do it, the more you involve the community and people in the making or development or ideas of a public artwork, the more they'll take ownership over it and the more it will become a piece for them. And then it becomes more of an identifier within that.
Do you think that public art should provoke discussion and even provoke controversy? Should it make people ask questions about their community rather than just bind us together, but ask us questions that maybe are difficult to address? And perhaps we can come together as a community after the fact, but, provoke and maybe unsettle us a little bit. Do you think that's a function of public art?
I absolutely 100% do. I do think that particular point of view is at odds with how public art is funded. Because public art is primarily government funded, the idea of actually critiquing government or criticizing the society you live in through that taxpayer base is not going to happen. And so fundamentally, that's one of the issues with the funding model.
Well, it seems like a lot of politicians see public art as an opportunity to beautify the city, and it's the sort of the public side of private gentrification. So if you have new communities looking really nice because a lot of people are investing in their homes, creating new facades on them, or doing infill developments, then the city should come in and beautify the public side as well. That is not really public art. That's more the entertainment as opposed to art, in the sense that beautification is opposed to public art. But does public art still have a purpose to beautify a city and make it feel like a livable space? Is that also part of the equation, or is that just what a politician would impose on this question?
I think that you can have public art that does a lot of different things, and it may not have to do it all in one work of public art. I think each one of them can have their own voice and their own opinion,
right,
based on the expertise of the artist and the community that they're working within. But I mean, like if you study the UNESCO studies on what we should have in our cities and what's beneficial to our cities, I mean, they really advocate for a wide variety of the types of art that are available within each city, so that you have some that provokes and angers and makes you question, and you also have some that's really easy to understand and it's just pretty. And to have that wide range of participatory practices as well as artist expertise practice. And so I think that trying to look at all public art and squish it into one category and this is what it's got to be like, it's never going to work. We need to have that range.
Right. So it's almost like we have to have different colors on the palette, or, you go into a museum, if it's all Renaissance art, well, you're probably only going to attract a certain crowd. But if you put your eggs in multiple baskets, so to speak, you're probably going to have a more successful public art program and a more successful city on the whole as well.
And every time, art is engaging, and it's meant to make you feel and see and think different things. But we also have different things we want to see every day, different moods we want to see. Some days you want to listen to Taylor Swift, and some days you want to listen to AC/DC, right? Like, what's your mood and what's going to come up? And they're all valuable in their own way.
Right.
So the trick to that is when you're trying to add a political realm to that, or a taxpayer realm to that, and it becomes a political issue. What they really want to do is they want to make every single piece as successful as possible, meeting all of those different requirements in one case, and it's an impossible task.
Right.
So it's more about trying to curate an overall city or an overall plan, or even an overall country, and having a variety of these opportunities.
So as I mentioned at the beginning of this, there's been some controversy in Calgary around the public art program, and some recent developments over the last few months. Can you give some background on what is this controversy about? What are people? There are many people who have been angry about it, have voted in the recent municipal election based on public art as their main issue. What's the controversy about?
Well, that's a really good question. It really depends who you talk to. I mean, it tends to come down to bottom line. It tends to come down to, I don't want my dollar to go to that.
Okay.
And I didn't get a say in whether or not my dollar went to that. And I don't like it, so I don't want it.
Right.
And there's a lot of different arguments against that. There's a lot of different arguments on either end. But because the issue is so emotional, it seems to really tap into some emotional anger spot for people. It's really hard to come to a rational conversation about, but look at the benefit of this. Look at how many dollars we get back. Look at how much of that money goes into the community. Or how about it's not about money? Maybe it's about, creating this beautiful city, this dynamic city, this interesting city, this conversation that is intangible and there is no dollar figure attached to it.
Right.
But these aren't arguments that anybody wants to hear when they're angry about how they didn't like it and they didn't want their money to go to that.
Right.
And in the end, it comes down to the fact that everybody believes that this taxpayer pool somehow is their home budget, that they can choose their purview, and somehow, if I wouldn't buy it and put it in my home, therefore I wouldn't, put it in my city.
Right.
I remember hearing somebody once say that art was like the parsley on your plate. That you get this beautiful plate in front of you, and it doesn't look quite right unless you have this this piece of parsley that's beautiful and kind of decorating the plate on the side. I'm so disappointed in that, because it's not the parsley, because you can take the parsley off and your plate's still delicious. Art is actually the salt.
Right.
It is integrated. It is the one that adds to the flavor. It's what makes all the other flavors blossom and come out. And so it's your plate is not the same if you take it out. It's gone. And unfortunately, art is so seamlessly integrated into everything we do every day that sometimes people don't even realize that's there anymore, just like salt.
Right.
So it's hard to show people the value of something that they don't recognize and don't want to recognize.
Right. It's definitely an issue that arouses emotions in people. Part of the reason I'm saying that is because not too long ago, Councillor Jeremy Farkas, who's a new councillor in City Hall in Calgary, put a notice of motion forward asking the City of Calgary to apologize for its public art program, and only him and Sean Chu voted in favor, and the rest of council obviously had said no. But of course, the headline the next day was City of Calgary refuses to apologize for its public art program. And this is in the midst of the Beaufort Towers, which aroused a lot of emotions. It's in the west end of Calgary. I think it's on 16th Avenue as you're driving out towards Banff and Canmore in the mountains. And there are these 4 towers made of, looks like rusted steel. And then there's some rocks that look like, rocks in the middle of each one. And people would drive by and they would say, "What on earth is that? What is it doing in my city? I had no idea this was happening." And it reminds me of the Big Blue Ring going north on Deerfoot Trail, again from downtown Calgary, which is, and a lot of people's criticism of this is that it would just seem like it was tacked on to a highway in the middle of nowhere. Now, I'm paraphrasing people who clearly didn't do much research into this. This is just their experience driving one way and then driving the other and just seeing this big blue ring in the middle of nowhere, and then learning how much it costs, and then thinking how much better use that money could have made in their minds, right? And not just in terms of where they could have been spent in other departments of the city, but how about putting all the money together and having a nice piece of art right downtown where everybody can appreciate it rather than affecting my drive, right? So this is the kind of emotional quotient of people when they're talking about public art who aren't necessarily engaged with it on your level or engaged with it at all. So how do you, these are people who, they pay their taxes, they go on, they drive home, they're members of this community, but they don't feel like they're involved in the process, and they're angry when they see this. How do you, on those 2 specific examples, like how do you respond to them, knowing that they're not sitting in the room making this up?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that having worked for 10 years at that program, one of the most important things we did was community engagement. And we talked to hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people every year. And we did town halls and sent out surveys and did community engagement events where we collected information back and forth. And we did not make decisions in isolation ever. We worked with every department that we could possibly work with, and we engaged as much public as humanly possible. Send out invites. You're desperate for people to come. Frequently, they don't show up.
Of course.
One of the great plights of engagement is that you can ask them to come, you can ask them for feedback over and over again, and then they don't come, they don't give you feedback, and then they're angry afterwards because they didn't like how it turned out. But we worked hard, very, very, very hard to get feedback. And one of the things that we got over and over and over again, not just once, multiple times, was that one of the key places that we wanted to see art, or that the public wanted to see art in Calgary, was at the entryways to the cities,
right,
which at the key markers along the highways as you drove into the city, so that you could have that identifying feature, that placemaking piece that showed you that here you were, you've arrived. That's exactly what Beaufort did. And then everyone got angry that there was this piece along a road out in the middle of nowhere that distracted you when you were driving. Well, so what did you want?
Right.
I don't understand. We met your need, and then we didn't meet your need. So, that's one of the really tricky parts with engagement, is you're always going to get opinions on either side of the story. Always.
Right.
You're going to get hundreds. You're going to get support in droves on either way. So even when you do your engagement, you still need to have your expertise and your experts and all the other people who have that background knowledge inform the final decision, which is then going to be seen as elitist because they made a decision on behalf of the public.
Right.
So you can't win.
Yeah.
But all you can do is put it out there and talk to as many people as you can, and then try to explain why you made the decisions that you made.
Yeah.
Beaufort is a fascinating example because it is. It's exactly what people requested. It's made of, so the stones were like from the quarry in Canmore, so that they're actually reflecting of the mountains that show the journey from Calgary to the mountains.
Right.
They're all these sustainable local products so that they were supporting local businesses.
Right.
They had an artist mentor who worked with them, so they were supporting the local artist community by encouraging our local artist community to have broad-scale public art experience.
Right.
In a public art budget, only 10% of the budget actually goes to the artist fee. The rest of it is to the fabrication.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the stuff that they work so hard to do to meet the needs.
Yeah.
Now, what was unfortunate? Well, I'll tell you, there's approximately 70 pieces of municipally funded public art in the city of Calgary. Most people know of two.
Right. Traveling Light and the Beaufort Towers.
Which were the two contentious ones of the 70-ish. And both of those were installed pre-election period. So both of those were installed at a time when public art became a conversation, and suddenly it became an election issue, and it became something that turned into a kind of a media storm, if you want to call it that, of misinformation in a lot of cases, or opinion in a lot of cases that may not have been accurate. What about all the other ones? The other ones that are, higher budgets, lower budgets, all of these other wonderful pieces that people love and speak so fondly of. Our utility box program, people adore. They write into 311 all the time.
But don't mentally categorize it in the same place as the other two.
That's right. And so, these pieces, so we have all these public art pieces that were percent for art funded, but the city of Calgary also has their civic art collection, is this historical collection. People are so fond of those. They fight over them. They want them moved to be with them because, it's on my business card that this piece is attached to my building, and now I'm moving buildings, and can you move the public art to come with it? And,
Really?
so people are bonded to these works of art, and yet suddenly, when it's an election period and a piece went in and the cost of that piece was relatable, it's about the cost of a new home, and they can go, oh, that's how much money that thing costs. That's not worth it. Right. I'm going to bring that up.
So one thing that people often forget, they say, why are you doing public art? So Sean Chu, for example, said, why are we putting in public art when I knock on people's doors, they tell me to find them a job? Well, why aren't I using the money of public art and helping them get a job? Well, public art does create jobs, doesn't it? I mean, the artists get jobs. The people who are people like yourself who are working on these projects are paid to do this kind of thing. There are jobs that are created through public art, like any other aspect of a city. But there's one other criticism that I wanted to get you to hit. I know you know the answer to this, which is why I'm asking. At the time that the Beaufort Towers went up, one criticism is that the Blackfoot people were not sufficiently consulted on this public art, even though the public art clearly referenced Blackfoot tradition, the four towers representing the four seasons and the four directions and so forth. So what was that controversy about? Did the city neglect to consult in that aspect, or is there something else going on here?
Well, it wasn't specifically a truth and reconciliation project. It wasn't designed to be that. And the artists did a variety of consultations with a variety of groups. And as I understand it, I wasn't actually part of the project at that time. As I understand it, they did do some consultation with Indigenous groups. I think that there was misrepresentation of how much consultation was done, and rightfully so, the indigenous community stood up and said, "Oh, hey, we were not consulted to that degree, and don't you dare use us as a way to get away with this." Right. And no. Right. So, I think they were right in doing that. Unfortunately, I don't think that was the intention of the project from the beginning. Right. And it's tricky.
But like any piece of art, it can reference more than one thing.
Absolutely.
And if a piece of art references the whole world, does that mean it has to engage and consult with the whole world?
Yeah.
So it seems to me that what we're talking about here is not just public art. We're talking about democracy. We're talking about how we as human beings in our communities have to make collective decisions through our elected officials and the governments of which they are in charge. We're talking about the aggregation of opinion through voting. We're talking about people not being happy with the outcome. And we're talking about some people who are, of course, happy with the outcome. And we're trying also to talk about how we're achieving the greatest good for the greatest number of people through art. And there are some people who know what good art is and how art is supposed to bring communities together. And there are some people who have no idea what that's about and don't want to know. They don't want to engage. They don't want to show up for the meeting. They just want to be able to complain about it when it finally happens. So given that this is really what we're talking about, when you're doing public art, what are the bigger principles at play? Like, what are you always having to keep in mind when you're consulting with the community and trying to make the best decision for everybody? Like, what are the key principles that you have to keep in mind?
Well, I'm going to refer to engagement principles here as opposed to perhaps standard public art process.
Okay.
Standard public art process is very much a very well replicated best practice process that a lot of cities follow. But I'm actually going to talk to more of my expertise, which is about engagement. And unfortunately, engagement and what politicians mean by engagement are two very different things. So we'll get into that a little bit too. But generally with engagement, and particularly engagement with community development, trying to make your community a better place to be, what you're trying to do is get to the people that are not the usual suspects. So ultimately, you want to try to find the voices that you're not normally hearing, because generally they will bring new opinions, new ideas, and also they're usually the ones that are being underserved because they are not presenting their ideas. And so you want to find out what they need. Often those are your impoverished, those are your underprivileged in a variety of ways, your disabled, your elderly, your youth. Often youth are completely ignored. And they're incredibly difficult to engage. One of the tricks with public art is that you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's true of every realm. But when you tell people we're going to do a work of art in your community, we hear the same thing over and over again. I'm going to get a mural.
Right.
That's what people think art is. In Calgary, they might think they're going to get their utility box painted or their garbage cans painted because those are very popular, and that's what they believe a work of art is.
Or a statue in the middle of a roundabout.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm thinking in Europe.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking maybe much more traditional public
art. So the sculptural stuff, yeah. And so, there's a contradiction because, public art tends to be... Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. Public art tends to be from a contemporary visual art practice. I mean, artists are trained in contemporary visual art. Contemporary art specifically challenges societal norms. It often is meant to make you think or change what you believe to be true about your community. So that works really well for community engagement, because if I'm going in with community engagement and I'm working with a contemporary artist who wants you to challenge or see things differently or to find out the less common voice so that they can draw that voice out and bring it into the public, those work really well together.
I'm just taking a picture of you.
Thank you. I
that's
appreciate
why
that.
There's the pause
That's
in the
not distracting
conversation.
at all.
No. I do that. So just as a pause in this, I do that in every single interview. I pull up my camera, I take a photo of the person I'm interviewing, and then I'm going to use that on social media later. And every time the person thinks, what, he's checking his email in the middle of the interview, and then I point the camera at them, and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm being recorded. This is going to be on video too." And I really have no choice, but I really want to capture the interviewee in a vulnerable moment of being interviewed. Anyways, go ahead.
I'd like to capture you in a vulnerable moment too.
Okay, you can grab my camera and take a picture. All right. Anyways, go ahead.
I'm completely distracted, so we'll try to get back on track here. Ultimately, so that's why I was so fascinated with your first interview, your first podcast, and the idea of populism, because really, ultimately, what a lot of politicians mean by engagement is they're trying to get the popular opinion,
right?
And they're trying to develop and get support for what they're doing through a popularist approach to building whatever that is, including public art. Why are you laughing at me?
No, I'm not laughing at you. I have a couple of thoughts. This is how I'm thinking. My face is contorting because I have interesting.
I'm like, what did I say? Stupid.
No, I've got interesting questions in my head that I'd like to ask you. So. That's what my face does. Please keep going.
But so here's the disconnect with the language, right? Is the politicians come to the administration and they say, we want you to do engagement to get public art that the public likes.
Right.
And we hear, okay, we want to do engagement. Well, engagement is not about getting a popular opinion.
Right.
Engagement is about drawing in other people. It's about getting people connected. It's about creating a sense of community. And I often talk about the numbers game. So when I do engagement and I put an event out into the world and I ask people to come join us so that we can hear their stories and take elements of their stories and build it into a work of art in some way. I'm asking them to come and spend hours of their life with me, a complete stranger, and share their personal information, which I am then able to use in some type of public realm. That's a big ask. How many people do you know who can even listen to an hour of your podcast, never mind who are willing to come spend 2 hours of their life with you to give you stuff? So for me, if I run an engagement and I get 10 people, I've had a huge success. That's massive.
Yeah.
It really is.
Right.
And yet if I talk to a politician and I say, I had 10 people come, they're like, oh, only 10 people. Like they expect 500, 1,000.
Yeah.
And that's when they think a number is successful. And like, no, there is a disconnect here on what we're talking about.
For sure.
But what I've done is I've taken those 10 people and we've shared intricate stories. We've created an emotional connection. We've created people who are going to protect each other, who are going to protect a piece of their public realm, who are going to share the story with the rest of their community. It's going to grow, it's going to ripple, it's going to be something different.
Yeah.
So I've created a seed of something that's actually going to create long-lasting change versus 500 people who came in and saw, drew a little painting on a mural as they walked by and then disappeared again.
Right.
There's no lasting connection in what they've done.
Right.
So what do you want? Do you want the 500 people so that you can say you have 500 people, or do you actually want some change in your community that's going to make it stronger and better?
So 3 things I want to say. First of all, to note that you know me, and that's why when I smiled like that, you were able to say, Ben, what are you laughing at me for? It made me think, all the other interviews that I've done, are the people thinking that I'm laughing at them at that moment? I really hope not, because I'm just thinking and coming up with ideas as you're talking, as we all do in conversation. I'm not laughing at you, previous interviewees and future interviewees. Okay, so the second thing I wanted to say was, it seems that you're talking about engagement, you're talking about getting public opinion and how politicians can conflate it with public approval. But and I'm just taking almost a devil's advocate stance here when we're talking about government and democracy. Sometimes engaging with the public can get their buy-in to something that they might not otherwise buy into. It's almost coercive. We're almost saying, all right, we engaged with you, therefore you have no right to complain. So what are you coming back at us for? Because we did all this work and we're doing, as the higher level government, the top-down imposition, we're doing what we think is best for you. And we already asked you for your opinion, both in an election, in these engagement forums, in these town halls. So please just go about your business, and we're doing what's right. Do you think that that's a fair assessment, not only of public art, but of democracy as a whole, that engagement can sometimes be an act of, I guess I don't want to say coercion, but an act of, hey, got your approval, please don't speak about this in the future, almost like an election can be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we've even got it down to an art form. Like there's this, spectrum of engagement, and all different corporations have different ways of using it. The model that I tend to follow has 5 levels of engagement. And most people, not just government, anybody who does engagement, they tend to focus on the first 3 levels, which are inform. I don't have it in front of me. So
That's okay.
Anyway, the first 3, which are basically just sharing information and getting buy-in, exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
And so they tend to use these public forums as an opportunity to get out there, answer some questions, maybe get like a little survey feedback, and you have all these little things, where you stick your dot on a chart and you get your feedback and you feel like you've given your opinion, right?
Right.
And they call that engagement. And you might get 500 to 1,000 people in the room, and you might be able to say that we've had that number.
Yeah.
in my work, I tend to focus on the top two levels. There's these, 4, 5s, sometimes in some models 6, where you're actually actively getting people to participate, and you're actually actively getting them involved and invested in what's happening. And in many ways, they control the outcome of what happens. That's the work I like to do. I'm most impassioned about it. But you get less people for a more extended period of time.
Right.
So they're at odds. And so I just don't think that what we mean by that word engagement is even the same at that level.
Right. This makes me think, and you're going to think that I planned to say this. I really didn't, because you've worked in the theater quite a bit. In fact, you have a master's degree in theater, in drama, from the University of Calgary. Augusto Boal talked in his book, Theater of the Oppressed, which is in some way inspired by Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. He talked in his very first chapter about the coercive nature of Greek theater. And he believed that the whole purpose of Greek theater, when you come down to it, was to give people an outlet for their grievances and to let off some steam, to feel agony and to feel pity and fear for the main character who stabs out his eyes or whatever happens to him, whether it's Oedipus or Agamemnon or whatever, in whichever play you're talking about in Greek theater. Get out your emotions, because if you get them out in the theater, you're not going to riot the next day in the street, right? You're going to be okay with the fact that there isn't enough bread for you, because you know it's all in greater service of the good. Now, Augusto Boal was simplifying a very powerful act of art, but he was saying that art does a very different thing than a lot of people who say that art is subversive. Art is meant to undermine and or at least give the other side of the coin when we're talking about government or corporations, to give us the other side of the story, so to speak. But what Augusto Boal was saying was, no, art is actually meant to let you get off some steam, maybe go for a bit of a dance, so that tomorrow you can go about your job and go about your daily life. As a theater person, as well as as a person who enjoys studying and theorizing about things, is there a connection there between what we're talking about with public art and theater and Greek drama?
Well, I've heard this theory, and there, there's the theory that our sports realms are now the replacement for the Colosseums, right? And so that's where people burn off their steam now and have their collective scream, and you'll see it sometimes riot. So I don't know that it really works.
Or at least it's contained. At least we contain the rioting, and we have all the police in one place when it happens. When some team loses the Stanley Cup or the World Cup or whatever.
But it's a story you'll often hear in Calgary, around public art, is the Brotherhood of Mankind, which is a public artwork which is incredibly dear to the Calgary public right now. It's been in for 60-ish years, and it was in front of the former Board of Education building, and the Board of Ed, when they moved, it's on their business cards. They wanted it to come with them. Like it's this dear work of art, probably our most famous and most beloved. And then, but when it was installed, it was universally hated, full on petitions to remove it from the city. It was vandalized within 2 days of it being installed. People were furious about this thing. And there was this huge uprising against it. And it was because they were naked. So it was shame.
Yeah.
Naked. How dare there be naked people in the public realm? If it was behind closed doors, oh my. But it shows you how yes, there are these uprisings and this anger and this deep emotion, which is what art's meant to do. It's meant to create that, for sure. But that also transitions over time, and what a piece means to a different community, different generation, and people now will talk about how they remember how their parents were really angry about that one, but how much they love it. So it adapts with your city. It grows and changes with the city. And even traveling light, affectionately known as the Blue Ring. I mean, same thing. People were in an uproar where this is the last time that we had to deal with all this, rewrites of the policy. Is it going to be canceled? Yada, yada, yada. But in the end, the Blue Ring has its own Twitter feed. It has its own Facebook page. People have petitioned to have it decorated at Christmas. It's developed already in a very short period of time. Its own voice within a community. And now, anybody who flies into Calgary who might have heard about the Blue Ring, they look for it because you can see it from your airplane as you're landing, and you see it on the highway, and it's become already a cultural centerpiece within our city. And so all these people who were furious and had this angry emotional response to the point where they actually like were performing death threats.
Yeah.
They're wrong. They're wrong. This piece is loved. It's become a part of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Back to your question. Yes, it is an outlet. Yes, it's emotional. Maybe that's what's happening in a kind of, public coliseum in digital media these days. But I do not think that it's diffusing the anger of people. I think it actually is enraging a larger group of people who are then even less informed because they're getting less and less information as it filters out through further media.
Making more and more of a big deal out of less and less information.
Absolutely.
One of the things I talk about a lot on this program is story and the human story.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like what we're talking about in this conversation is how art plays a role in communicating the human story and possibly telling the human story that we haven't arrived to yet.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps art is at the vanguard of the story that will be told tomorrow. Stravinsky's Rite of Spring is a great example. It's almost a cliche cited piece of music from the early 20th century. Stravinsky put on the Rite of Spring, which is today heralded as one of the greatest pieces of classical music by some people of all time. When it first went up in Paris, there was a riot.
Right.
Now, to imagine a riot today occurring because of a piece of classical music is absurd.
Right.
But at the time it wasn't. People thought that this was trampling on hundreds of years of tradition. They thought that this piece of music was despoiling everything that European culture had arrived at, and it was a piece of modernism that had gone just too far. Today, it is part of the canon. It is a celebrated piece of music without which classical music would not be the same, and art would not be the same. The way we hear music would not be the same. Stravinsky, with that piece of music and with others, changed the way that we hear music. Would it? I mean, I'm not going to say that the Great Blue Ring, traveling light, or the Beaufort Towers on 16th Avenue in Calgary are going to change the way that we appreciate art. But it's possible. Mm-hmm. It's possible it will change the way that Calgarians see their city. Surely that is a worthy goal, even if it doesn't work out. I mean, if in hindsight, we would probably want more pieces of classical music to cause riots, because we would probably be better for it in the end. The Rite of Spring is a great part of the human story. Is that not a worthy goal? Maybe a very lofty goal, but a worthy one nonetheless of what we're trying to do with public art and even democracy?
Sure. I mean, I took a lot in my, when I studied for my thesis in collaborative creation, that, one of the problems with our society is we avoid conflict, right? And really conflict are those keys to overcoming difference. It's through those moments of conflict that we learn to challenge each other, have conversation, get through things, and start to appreciate the other side of the story. And that's another whole topic in itself. But ultimately, the blue ring for me, because I do community engagement and I go out and I talk to people about public art all the time, it was fabulous. It was the best piece of public art we ever had, because I could walk out there and I could say, so do you know what public art is? And they go, no idea. What are you talking about? And I'd say, the blue ring? Oh, well. And they'd dive into a story. I'm like, so now you know. So everybody who had never thought about public art or its importance, or they had an opinion. And I could start a conversation. And even though we started on different sides of that story, in the end, we had a commonality that we could start from. And that's what conflict is, right? So, yeah, I think they are important because they do create a framework. And it's not about whether you like it or not. Like the value, the dollar value that can't even possibly be calculated in return of how many conversations were had about what we want in our city or what's important to our people or where our tax dollars should go, that came out of a tiny blue ring. I mean, that it's incalculable, right?
Yeah.
I can't even say that word. Incalculable.
Yeah.
But that's the idea, right? And so, unfortunately, we live in a world where we calculate everything on factual numbers or quantitative ideas, and we're looking at a qualitative understanding of the importance of something that creates a human connection.
Well, and such a small part
Yeah.
of a city's budget or a government's budget is dedicated to this. Again, going back to theater, many artists will say that the worst thing that can happen when you put on a play is that people are indifferent. They don't really hate it, but they don't love it either, and it's okay. I'm glad I saw it. That's the worst reaction you can get. If you have your entire audience walk out in anger, that's a great reaction. And for an artist, creating the conversation, creating a good conversation is good, probably better, probably preferable, but still, creating a conversation nonetheless is a worthy act and I guess a worthy result of the creation of that piece of art. One other thing I wanted to mention, and I guess you don't have to respond to it because it's coming from your work. You talked about conflict just now, and I remember one of the analogies from your master's thesis was you remember that I read it years ago, that conflict is the cauldron. Conflict is the heat that within which the soup is mixed together. And so all the ingredients that we put in the soup, we mix those together, but they wouldn't congeal. They wouldn't create the flavor. They wouldn't create soup or a meal without the heat underneath. Too much conflict burns the soup. Too little conflict, it doesn't work. And I think that going back to that principle, maybe conflict is actually something that we should strive for, so long as it's coercively contained, like in Greek theater, maybe, or in the Colosseum. But conflict is still something that has a positive value.
I believe it does. I think the real issue is the lack of respect and the lack of dignity for the people who might be on the other side of that conflict. And that's what we're really seeing, unfortunately, and this maybe goes back to this like digital age or the separation or the too quickly moving society, is that it used to be that you could have a friendly debate with someone who didn't agree with you, and you could try to understand their side of the story and maybe walk away with a bit of knowledge. Now it becomes something that you want to kill somebody over. Yeah. And like, when did we lose that respect for dignity and variety and just an understanding that people come from different ways of seeing things, right, that I might not like the color orange so much?
Do you think it's possible, last question, that public art can help us achieve or come back to that place of mutual respect and conversation?
Well, I believe that. I absolutely do, which is why I continue to do this work and continue to follow through. And I've seen so many successful projects, and unfortunately those successful projects don't make the news. They don't make the headlines. They don't become the election issues. And what I'd love is to be able to share all those stories with the people so that they could see those wonderful things that have resulted from works of art that maybe challenge and make people think and see things a little differently, that they may not like the look of, but they understand where it came from and why it's there, and they get it. Yeah.
This has been a fantastic conversation. Special thanks to the public art that has been displayed in this conversation, the kids playing upstairs. That's the dose today of public art that you're going to get. Dawn, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you for having me.
That's the conversation this week. To learn more about Dawn Van de Schoot, please visit the website, wogoshow.com. That's WOEGO show.com. You can listen to this episode and any other at that same website. Now, your quote of the week is from the American writer John Updike. What art offers is space, a certain breathing room for the spirit. Thanks again.